I found it on a Thursday. Not a letter. Not a phone call. Just a web page. The mouse was slow. The library computer at the senior facility made a soft clicking sound each time I tapped. My name Anita Feldman typed with 2 careful fingers. The screen flickered. Then the page loaded. A photo of me, taken years ago. Beside a short paragraph. In memory of the woman who raised me. Written by Rachel. Posted on my birthday. I read it twice. Then again. Not because I didn't understand. But because I couldn't believe I was alive. And reading my own eulogy. It was beautifully written. Of course it was. She had watched me edit words for decades. Now she used them to bury me. There was no mention of where I was. No update. No note to say I had moved. Just soft phrases. May she rest. Forever. Remembered. My second mother. The absurdity made my hands cold. I reached for the armrest. The vinyl cracked beneath my fingers. The room around me buzzed faintly. Someone coughing. A clock ticking slowly. Distant wheels on linoleum. But inside me, it was silent. Still. I didn't cry. I simply clicked save page as. The printer was broken that week. So I saved it to a flash drive. And then, I opened a blank document. The cursor blinked. Waiting. No title. No plan. Just the first sentence. They said I was gone. Outside the window. The late winter light stretched across the parking lot. On the sill. Someone had left a styrofoam cup with wilting tulips. It looked forgotten. Much like me. But I had edited stories my whole life. I knew when a story wasn't finished. Especially mine. So I began to write. Not a letter to Rachel. Not a complaint to the facility. Something deeper. A memory. I described the smell of old paper. The way my husband once annotated poetry with a fountain pen. The sun through the blinds in our 4th floor walk-up. And as the words appeared, something returned. Not youth. Not vengeance. Voice. What if the world decides you're done? But your story still has chapters left. I used to live on the 4th floor. No elevator. Just 67 steps. I counted them every morning when I was younger. Now I count them in memory. Like prayer beads. Each step had a sound. A slight creak. Or the way the metal rail warmed in summer. Cooled in February. At the top me door. Green paint peeling. The brass mail slot a little loose. Inside, it smelled like time. Books, paper, lavender polish. And something faint. Always there. The scent of my husband's cologne, clinging to the coat he left behind. That apartment was never big. But it knew me. Knew the weight of my feet. The rhythm of my typing. The way I hummed when I made lentil soup. It had a window by the kitchen sink. Where pigeons came to roost in winter. I used to whisper edits aloud there. Practicing my notes to young writers. And sometimes, just to hear another voice in the room. My desk was under the bedroom window. Right between 2 sagging bookshelves. The drawers stuck in summer. But I never minded. They held letters from writers who never made it. Pages marked with red ink. Margins full of dreams. I remember the sunlight best. The way it touched the wooden floor at 3 p.m. Falling across my husband's reading chair. Where he used to sit with a book and a blanket. He always left the blanket askew. Always. After he passed. I left the blanket there for months. Never folded it. Never moved it. It was my way of holding him in place. Rachel came by more often in those days. She would bring croissants. Talk about graduate school. Ask me about the authors I worked with. She said I was the reason she loved books. I believed her. Back then, she sat on the floor while I read aloud my edits. She used to say, "Graham, your voice sounds like pages turning." And I smiled, like that meant everything. She loved how I marked things in pencil. Soft lines, never in red. She said it felt gentle. Like I was guiding, not correcting. And I thought, yes, that's what I always wanted to be. A guide, not a gatekeeper. When she suggested the move, it wasn't cruel. It sounded thoughtful. Just a few months, Graham, she said. So I won't worry when I'm traveling. She brought chamomile tea, packed boxes carefully, labeled them in neat handwriting, said she'd keep the apartment safe. Short-term rental only, she promised, to help cover management fees. I didn't ask for more. Didn't want to seem ungrateful or fragile. I thought I'd be back by spring. But spring came, and no one mentioned the steps, or the books, or the blanket. That's when the forgetting began. Not in my mind, but in theirs. And the worst kind of forgetting is the one that's polite, unspoken, wrapped in kindness so soft, you almost thank them for it. I remember sitting in the activity room, 2 months after moving in. Someone was reading aloud from a bestseller I once rejected as a manuscript. I didn't say anything, just folded my hands and listened to the sound of a story that didn't need me. That was the first time I wondered, what happens when a woman stops being asked to edit the world around her? If you've ever felt like your voice was fading, like your memories lived in rooms you can no longer enter, I see you, and I hope you'll stay. Because sometimes, the second act starts quietly, with a whisper, and a pen. Where are you listening from tonight? Has a place, or a person, ever made you feel forgotten? Please share in the comments. You never know who needs your words. There were days I didn't speak. Not out of sadness, but because no one asked anything that needed an answer. They would wheel us into the dining hall. Soft music playing. A tray with peas, potatoes, and meatloaf already plated. Some residents prayed. Others chewed in silence. I just watched the dust float in the sunlight. It moved more freely than any of us. On Wednesdays, they read poetry. Not the kind I used to edit, but rhymed pieces from calendars. Short, tidy, predictable. I used to sit near the window, let the light touch my hands, and close my eyes, trying to remember how it felt to hold a manuscript still warm from the printer. That slight chemical scent. The soft crinkle when turning pages too fast. Here, everything was laminated, protected, nothing left to smudge or bleed. One afternoon, a nurse asked if I wanted help signing my name. She meant well, but it caught me. The way she gently moved the pen toward my hand. Like I had forgotten what it meant to own a name. To place it firmly at the bottom of something. That night, I couldn't sleep. I turned the light on, sat up in bed, and wrote my name again and again. On the back of tissues. The margin of a crossword. The inside of a cereal box. Not out of protest, but to remember how it curved. How it looped. How it still belonged to me. Anita Feldman. When you've spent a life cleaning up the words of others, you begin to question the permanence of your own. Sometimes I would press my thumb against the window glass, just to feel resistance. The weight of something pushing back. Proof that I was still here. One evening, I watched a younger volunteer help Edith, my hallmate, with a video call. She spoke into a screen, waited for someone to reply, then smiled. Even though no one spoke on the other end. I couldn't tell if the person hung up, or never answered. But Edith smiled anyway, as if the image on the screen was enough. And I wondered if we were all doing that. Smiling at shadows. Filling silence with our best guess at connection. The books here were mostly thrillers. Mass-market paperbacks, swapped often. No one really remembered the endings. Only that the covers were shiny. I missed the stories that left questions. The kind that didn't tie everything up in ribbon. The ones with pauses. With paragraphs that sat quietly in your chest long after you closed the cover. Sometimes, I would visit the small shelf near the recreation office. Run my fingers over the spines. And think. None of these people knew that I once chose which stories lived. And which ones didn't? There was a strange comfort in that. In the quiet. The anonymity. Because I had spent so many years refining others. I had forgotten what my own unpolished voice sounded like. Now it returned slowly, like steam on a winter pane. First a wisp, then a sentence, then a memory I hadn't planned to keep. The kitchen tiles in my apartment were cracked near the stove. I used to think of replacing them, but I never did. Because the cracks told the story of every night he stood there, stirring soup with too much time, insisting it needed more. In the home, the floors were vinyl. Always clean. Always the same. No story to tell beneath your feet. That, I realized, was what I missed most. Texture. Even grief had texture. The tear stains on a note. The softness of a shirt never washed again. The dry click of a lamp he once turned off each night. It was all still inside me, pressed between memories, like flowers in a forgotten book. They hadn't taken that. No. They had simply stopped asking. And perhaps that was my greatest mistake. Waiting to be asked. To be remembered. To be needed. When maybe the remembering was always mine to begin. It was Rachel's birthday. I remembered because I used to bake her almond cake. She loved the burnt edges best. Said they tasted like caramel and childhood. That morning, I walked past the activity board in the hallway. Someone had drawn balloons in dry erase marker. Blue and gold. I thought of texting her. But my phone was always charging. Always somewhere else. And I wasn't sure she'd reply. Instead, I asked one of the aides if the computer lab was open. She smiled. Said she'd check. But never came back. So I wandered into the library. Opened an old copy of Middlemarch. The one with underlined passages and folded corners. And read the same paragraph twice. In the silence, I could hear laughter from the rec room. Someone's show playing too loud. The scrape of chairs on vinyl. But beneath it all, I imagined Rachel blowing out candles. Everyone cheering. Photos being taken. Glasses clinking. I had not been invited. Not that I expected it. Not really. But somewhere inside me, there was still that flicker. That hope. Like when you walk by your old mailbox and still glance inside, even though you know it's no longer yours. I closed the book. Ran my hand across the embossed cover. It was warm from the sun, but cold underneath. Like something pretending to be alive. There was a framed photo of Rachel and me. Tucked in the pages. Taken at her college graduation. She was wearing heels too tall for the stairs. I was holding her elbow, just in case. But she didn't need me. Not really. She never had. I folded the photo. Slipped it into my cardigan pocket. Not because I needed it, but because I didn't want to forget the weight of it. Later, during lunch, someone asked if I had family. I said yes. But my voice was quieter than I meant it to be. They smiled. And moved on to the next question. Soup or salad? As if those were the only choices left. That night, I sat by the window, staring at the moon's reflection in the birdbath below. And for the first time in years, I felt like a ghost. Not dead. Just misplaced. What do you call it? When your name hasn't been spoken aloud in months? Because I think that's what I missed most. Not love. Not visits. But being remembered. By voice. By name. Not as a thought. Or an obligation. But as someone still living. Still here. Still. Me. The last time I saw their living room, there was a photo of me on the bookshelf. Next to Rachel's wedding album. It was taken on a windy day at Coney Island. I wore my husband's scarf. Held it tight around my neck. The fringe danced like seaweed in the breeze. Rachel said it was her favorite photo. Graham, you look like a story in that one. I never asked what kind of story. But I held on to that line. For years. Now. It's gone. I found out when a volunteer showed me pictures from Rachel's social media. She scrolled through albums slowly. A baby shower. A vacation. Then the house. Bright and spotless. Repainted in cool grays. Where my photo had been, there was now a minimalist print. 3 black dots on a white canvas. And a candle with eucalyptus leaves beside it. She said nothing. Just tilted the tablet so I could see better. I smiled. Or tried to. And said the new color made the room look bigger. Later, I tried to remember where she'd put the framed picture. Maybe a drawer. Or a closet. But I knew. Not everything that disappears is misplaced. Sometimes it's a decision. Not an accident. A few weeks later, one of the staff members wheeled me into a family day brunch. Tables with fake peonies. Background music playing something vaguely classical. I saw name cards at every place setting. Except mine. There was no mistake. Just oversight. They pulled a chair from the hallway. Placed it at the corner. Between 2 tables. Where I wouldn't block the servers. No one said much. A few kind nods. A gentle pat on the hand. Rachel waved from across the room. Held up her baby. Pointed. Smiled. I waved back. But I didn't go over. Not because I didn't want to. But because I didn't know where I fit. Afterward, I found a small note left under my plate. It read, "So glad you could make it, Anita. Hope the food was okay." No signature. Just handwriting I didn't recognize. I folded it carefully. Tucked it into the side pocket of my bag. And I thought, this is what remains. A seat with no name. A plate with no voice. A gathering I was allowed to attend, but not invited to belong. And I wondered, if a tree falls in a family, but no one says your name, did you ever really grow there? The first time I saw the new family portrait, it was hanging in their dining room, above the buffet table, next to a mirror shaped like a sunburst. Everyone was there. Rachel, her husband, the baby in white, Rachel's parents. I wasn't. At first, I thought maybe they had a second version. One with extended family. One with me. But Rachel had shared it proudly. "This is the one," she said. "The one we'll frame." I stared at it longer than I meant to. Long enough for her to shift uncomfortably. Then say, "We couldn't include everyone, it would have been too crowded." Too crowded. As if my presence, even as a photo, was too much to hold on a wall. I nodded. Said nothing. That night, I dreamt I was at their table. But the chair beneath me was made of air. And every time I tried to sit, I fell through. I woke up cold. Blankets kicked to the floor. The ceiling unfamiliar. In the hallway, someone had dropped a walker. The clang echoed through the quiet. But no one came. Sometimes, the silence is worse than the absence. Because silence lets you wonder if maybe they forgot you on purpose. There was once a tradition in my family. Every fall, we'd light a candle for those we'd lost. Line the windowsill with flickering glass. Say their names aloud. One by one. My name had never been spoken in that way. Until now. Not because I was dead. But because I had been archived. Like an old manuscript. Important once. But no longer urgent. A friend at the facility once asked, "If they don't visit, do you still call them family?" I didn't answer. Because I wasn't sure if silence could be related to anything. In the library, I looked through the donation pile. Found a book I once edited. My name wasn't on the cover. But I remembered the choices. The cuts. The commas I had fought to preserve. And it hit me. Even in that story, I had been invisible by design. That day, I left the book on the shelf, unopened. And I thought, maybe there's dignity. Not just in being included, but in choosing where not to belong. Would you beg for a place at their table? Or would you protect your own pride? The envelope was plain. No return address. Just my name. Typed, not handwritten. It came on a Tuesday, tucked between a coupon flyer and a notice about flu shots. I almost didn't open it. Almost threw it away with the others. But something about the weight of it, the thickness of the paper, stopped me. Inside, 2 sheets. One in legal language. One with a simple table. Rows of numbers. Dates. Account names. At first, I didn't understand. It looked like a bank update. Then I saw the title at the top. Final ownership transfer confirmation. My eyes narrowed. I held the page closer. My breath shallow. The checking account. The one I had opened with my husband in 1973. Now listed Rachel as the sole owner. There was a line beneath it. Previous joint holder. Anita Feldman. Removed. Removed. No explanation. No signature. Just a quiet erasure. Like a pencil mark wiped clean. Like I'd never belonged to begin with. I touched the words with my fingertip, hoping the ink would smudge. Hoping it wasn't real. But it stayed still. Unmoving. Final. I reread it twice. Then once more aloud. My voice trembling. Cracking at the edges. There was no letter. No note. Not even a receipt. Just the fact of it. Printed in Times New Roman. On white paper. I sat for a long time. The room was quiet. The heater ticking softly. A faint hum from the hallway. I remembered the day we opened that account. The way my husband joked about retirement. How we argued over whether to add Rachel as a beneficiary. But never as an owner. Only when she's older, I had said. She'll understand the value better then. Apparently. Older had arrived. But understanding hadn't. I folded the paper. Creased it neatly. Placed it in the drawer beneath my socks. And thought. Maybe this was how things disappeared now. Not in fire. Not in theft. But in paperwork. And silence. What else had they signed? While I was busy trying to be small and agreeable? I waited 2 days. Then called Rachel. The phone rang 5 times. Her voice came through clear, cheerful, distracted. Graham? Everything okay? I paused. Held the paper in my lap. My fingers tracing the edge. I got something in the mail, I said. A bank notice. It says the joint account is no longer joint. Silence. Then a breath. Oh, right. Yeah. It's just a formality. You're not using it much these days. And with the taxes. She didn't finish the sentence. I closed my eyes. Rachel, did I sign something? Another pause. I mean, kind of. That day you signed the durable power of attorney forms at the center? Remember? It was all bundled. You said it was fine. My mind flashed back. That afternoon. She had brought cookies. Said the facility needed updated documents. Said it would just make things easier. I had trusted her. I didn't read the fine print. Didn't want to seem difficult. Back then, I still believed. That love came with transparency. I didn't know it included the bank account. I said softly. She sighed. Graham, it's not a big deal. Everything's still being used for you. Groceries, medications, bills. Nothing's changed. But everything had. It wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about the shift. From inclusion. To management. From with. To for. She said a few more things. Reassuring. Efficient. Polite. I barely heard them. After we hung up, I sat still for a long time, staring at the number written in the top corner of the statement. It wasn't large. It didn't need to be. That account wasn't wealth. It was memory. It held grocery store receipts from decades ago. A monthly donation to the small poetry press I used to edit for. An auto payment to the community garden fund on 89th Street. Little things. But mine. And now, It belonged to someone who had decided I didn't need access to it anymore. Not with malice. Not with cruelty. But with decision. And silence. I opened the drawer again. Laid the paper beside a photo of my husband. His eyes soft behind wire-rimmed glasses. As if still asking, "Are you sure?" No. I wasn't. But the question had already been answered. Without me. I used to sign things with a fountain pen. A smooth, heavy-barreled one. Blue-black ink. The kind that took a second to dry. The kind that meant something. I kept it in a velvet pouch. Top drawer. Right side. Alongside old birthday cards and a single gold safety pin. It was a habit. A ritual. My signature used to matter. It meant approval. Ownership. Presence. Now, it was a checkbox. A line added later. Or a scanned scribble on a digital form I never read. One afternoon, I asked the social worker at the facility if I could get a printed copy of the power of attorney form I'd signed months ago. She blinked. Asked why. Said it was standard. I said I just wanted to see it. The printout came in a manila folder. She handed it to me gently. Her eyes kind. As if I were asking to hold something fragile. I read every page. Each paragraph. Each clause. And there it was. Buried 3 pages in. Language that gave Rachel full access. Full control. Full authority. Revocable in theory. But not in spirit. Because undoing it would require conflict. Confrontation. And at 82, confrontation was exhausting. I traced my signature at the bottom. It looked tired. Tilted slightly left. As if even then, my name had hesitated. I held the pen again that night. Not to sign, but to remember. I wrote my name slowly on a notepad. Over and over. Anita Feldman. Anita Feldman. The loop in the F. The long underline I used to add in youth. It looked less certain now. But still mine. I thought of the ledger book my husband kept. Every check noted. Every bill folded neatly into an envelope. He treated money with reverence. Not for its power, but for what it held: history, responsibility, trust. He used to say, "A signature is a promise." I stared at mine. And wondered, what promise had I just given away? Maybe this is how it happens. Not with theft. Not with force. But with a favor. A stack of papers. A sweet voice saying, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." And you say yes. Because you're tired. Because you're grateful. Because you still believe you're being protected. Even when you're being erased. If the person you trust most quietly takes everything you've built, what are you left with? The room they moved me into had no window. Just a framed picture of a window. Hung slightly crooked on the wall. The light came from a fluorescent panel overhead, buzzing faintly. Too bright in the morning. Too dim at night. They called it temporary. Said the leak upstairs had displaced a few residents. That I'd be back in my old room soon. But temporary stretches quietly. Until it becomes indefinite. They gave me a cot. 2 drawers. A chipped water carafe. I placed my books carefully. One beside the other. Like old friends taking attendance. But it wasn't the same. The walls were thinner. I could hear coughs from 2 rooms over. The rumble of a television no one watched. A woman crying into her pillow at 3 a.m. Soft. Repetitive. Like someone remembering something too late. I stopped wearing my brooch. The one with the tiny emerald. It didn't match the fluorescent light. Didn't belong in this room without windows. I kept it in the drawer instead. Wrapped in tissue. As if preserving something no one else would bother to name. Meals came on trays. Delivered with kindness. But no conversation. Chicken or fish. Tea or milk. No one asked what I liked. Only what was left. I ate slowly. More out of habit than hunger. The peas were always overcooked. The rolls too dry. But once in a while, there was a slice of apple, cold, crisp, and for a brief second, it reminded me of fall in Central Park. When I used to meet Miriam on Wednesdays, bench 47, with coffee in paper cups, and our coats still smelling of old perfume and book dust. I wrote her a letter, but never mailed it. It's still folded in my dictionary, next to the word diminish. There were days I forgot what I sounded like. No one to speak to. Nothing that required reply. Even the mirror had been removed. For safety, they said. But it felt like something deeper. I began to wonder, what happens when a woman no longer sees her own face? Do her features begin to fade? Do her memories shift? Because there's no glass to hold them still? One night, I reached for the notebook I kept in the drawer, and realized it was missing. I searched both drawers, looked under the cot, checked the nurse's cart in the hallway. Nothing. It wasn't a valuable thing. Just pages of thoughts. Dreams. I remembered, half awake. Sentences I had once loved. Gone. And with it, a silence I couldn't fill. That night, I lay in the cot. The blanket too thin for March. The sheet too stiff from industrial detergent. The mattress was plastic under the sheet. It made a soft crackle every time I turned. Like I was moving on something that wanted to stay still. The woman in the next bed, her name was June, breathed heavily. Labored, but steady. She coughed every 20 minutes. Cleared her throat. Then whispered. Things I couldn't understand. Once, I thought I heard her say, "Is anyone still there?" But maybe she was dreaming. I stared at the ceiling. The tiles slightly off-white, marked with small dots like Braille. I couldn't read. I wanted to cry, but the tears stayed behind my eyes. Heavy. Quiet. There's a kind of sorrow that doesn't need sound. Only stillness. Like fog in a room no one has entered for years. My mind drifted back to my old apartment. To the way the floor felt under my bare feet in spring. To the crack in the bathroom tile I always meant to fix. To the place on the hallway wall where the paint bubbled from a radiator leak. I used to run my hand over it absent-mindedly. Like a blind woman memorizing texture. That was the shape of home. Not the layout, but the touch of it. The imperfections. Here, everything was clean. Predictable. Rounded corners and beige upholstery. Wipeable furniture. Nothing soft stayed long. A nurse knocked. Peeked in. Asked if I needed anything. I wanted to say, "Yes, I need to feel like a person again." But instead I said, "No, thank you." She smiled. Wrote something down. And left. I heard the pen scratch her clipboard. Felt the judgment in its silence. Later, I searched the hallway cart again, hoping someone had mistaken my notebook for a medication log. But there was nothing there. Only a plastic cup, half filled with water, and a used spoon. I returned to the cot, laid down carefully. My hands crossed over my stomach like someone waiting to be buried. And then, I whispered aloud, just to hear the sound of my voice. Am I still here? Not physically, but fully. Fully here. The room didn't answer. The light buzzed overhead. And I thought, when you lose everything you've ever known, do you still have yourself? June passed away on a Thursday. They moved her bed out before breakfast. Left the window open a crack. Even though it was cold. The nurse said it helped refresh the air. But I knew. It was to let something out. Even if no one would name it. They brought a new resident in by noon. Her name was Clara. She didn't speak much. But she had a photograph taped to the wall above her bed. A man in uniform. A boy holding a baseball. I stared at it for a long time. Trying to remember the last time someone had put my picture up. Not framed. Not cropped into a birthday collage. But a real photo. For no one but me. That night, I couldn't sleep. The cot groaned every time I shifted. Blanket tangled around my legs. My shoulders cold where the corners didn't reach. So I got up. Slowly. Wrapped my shawl tight. It still smelled faintly of old lavender. Though fainter now. Like a perfume someone wore decades ago. Only remembered by the lining of a drawer. I walked down the hall. Lights buzzing overhead. The floor chilled my feet through worn slippers. The linoleum had patterns like falling leaves. But they never changed. Static. Like me. A custodian nodded. Didn't ask where I was going. Didn't need to. I ended up in the small corner library. The one beside the vending machine. It smelled of laminate and forgotten paperbacks. The kind with creased spines and curled covers. I sat at the computer. The screen blinked to life. For a moment, I just looked at it. Not sure what to ask. Not sure I had the right to ask anything anymore. Then I typed slowly. How to publish a book on your own. My fingers were stiff, but remembered how to find the letters. The page loaded. I blinked at the words. Free platforms. Cover design tools. ISBN numbers. So many things I didn't know. But not one of them told me. I was too old. That mattered more than I expected. I scrolled. Clicked. Took notes on the back of a bingo scorecard. My handwriting shaky. But mine. Words like ownership. Final manuscript. Author rights. They didn't feel like decorations. They felt like doors. Not wide open. But not locked either. Something stirred. Not anger. Not joy. But motion. A clearing. A breath I didn't know I was still capable of taking. For the first time in months. I felt not observed. But in charge. Of a small thing. A quiet thing. The hum of the computer filled the room. The vending machine clinked behind me. Plastic and metal, and light. And I sat there. With my name in my lap. And a flicker in my chest. Maybe. Just maybe. I could still be the editor of something. Even if it was only myself. The next morning. Over watery oatmeal and a half cup of instant coffee. I sat with Edith. She had been here longer than most. Moved slowly. Spoke less. But when she did, her words had the weight of years. She watched me stir my spoon in silence. Then said, "You were up late last night." I looked at her. Not surprised. In this place. Silence traveled farther than footsteps. "Yes," I replied. "Just reading." She didn't ask what. She just nodded. Eyes soft. But knowing. After a while. She said, "I used to be a music teacher. Did I tell you that?" "No," I said. "You didn't." She smiled. 40 years, piano and voice, I don't play anymore, my hands. She held them up. Fingers curved inward slightly. Shaky. Still. I tried once, she continued. But it wasn't the same. The notes came out like ghosts. Hollow. Almost embarrassed to be heard. I didn't know what to say. So I just listened. Then she looked at me. With a steadiness I hadn't seen in weeks. "They say we're lucky here," she said. "We're fed. Cared for. Safe. But I've come to believe. Safety is not the same as meaning." I held that sentence in my chest like a coal. "Sometimes I wonder," I whispered. "If I've become too agreeable. Too quiet." She let out a breath. "Quiet is good. But silence can rot." Those words settled between us. Heavy. Undeniable. I thought of the documents I'd signed. The account I no longer owned. The photograph that had been removed from the wall. I thought of how many times I'd said, "It's okay. It doesn't matter. I'm fine." Even when I wasn't. I looked down at my tray. At the untouched toast. The square of pale jelly. The plastic knife. And suddenly, I felt tired of soft things. Tired of swallowing instead of speaking. "Edith," I said. "My name was on books. On letters. On leases. It's strange to wake up one day and realize It's now just on a door chart. She reached out, touched my wrist, and said nothing. She didn't need to. Because in that moment, I understood something. Small, but solid. This will not be my story. Not like this. That afternoon, I returned to the library, not out of restlessness, but with intention. I brought my old notebook. The new one had been misplaced weeks ago. But this one had survived the move. Faded cover. Bent spine. Still, mine. I flipped past lists of crossword clues. Grocery notes from a decade ago. Then landed on a blank page. The lines were faint, but enough to guide me. I picked up my pen. Not the hospital one, but my own. The one I kept in a glasses case, tucked behind a stack of outdated Reader's Digest. The ink still flowed. A little hesitant, but eager. I wrote the title first. Unpublished. Then paused. Looked at the word. Let it settle. There was something freeing about it. Like naming a scar. Before it fades completely. I began with memory. Not chronology. Not structure. Just a scent. The smell of cedar and old paper in our first apartment. The way my husband used to tap his foot while editing. How Rachel once sat on my lap as I marked up a manuscript, asking why I always used pencil. Because paper is kind, I had told her. And stories change. I wrote slowly. Not because I was unsure, but because each word felt sacred. The sun began to lower. A slant of warm gold crossed the table, lit up the edge of my notebook, caught the ridges of my handwriting. I kept going, even when my hand trembled. No one interrupted. No announcements. No medications being passed out. Just the quiet rhythm of return. Each paragraph felt like reclaiming a part of me. Not just the editor, but the woman who had once dared to shape something permanent. A sentence here. A memory there. Pages that belonged to no one but me. When I finally stopped, the room had shifted. Soft shadows reached across the shelves. And for once, I wasn't afraid of them. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and whispered, "This is where it begins again." Not as a comeback, not as revenge, but as a remembering of who I had always been, when no one was looking. Have you ever had to rebuild your voice? After the world told you to be quiet? We invite you to share your story below. You never know whose silence you might soften. I didn't tell anyone. Not the nurse. Not Edith. Not even Rachel. Some plans don't need permission. Only stillness. And a steady hand. The first thing I did was borrow a manila folder from the activity office. Said I wanted to keep my appointment slips organized. No one questioned it. Inside, I placed the first 20 pages of my manuscript. Printed 2 at a time from the public computer. Early in the morning, before the TV in the rec room blared its usual talk show. The ink smeared sometimes. My hands trembled on the mouse. But the words held. They didn't disappear like I feared they might. Each page felt heavier than it looked. Like it carried breath. History. I edited in pencil. Just like I used to. Soft lines in the margins. Little notes to myself. Cut this. Keep this. You don't owe them everything. By week's end, I had 38 pages. Double-spaced. Stapled in clusters of 5. I called the print shop on 80th, the one tucked behind the pharmacy. It was still open. Still run by someone named David. Though the original owner had long since retired. David sounded young. But kind. He didn't rush me. Didn't interrupt. Just said, "Sure, we print small batches all the time. Bring it in. We'll figure it out." I smiled into the receiver. Felt the warmth of being treated. Not as elderly. Not as someone to manage. But as a customer. A person. I asked if I could mail it instead. He said yes. Told me how to format the file. What to include in the envelope. I wrote down the details twice. Once on paper. Once on my forearm. Just in case I forgot where I put the paper. That night, I walked past the mirror in the hallway. The one near the dining room. For weeks, I had avoided it. Afraid of what it might confirm. But this time, I paused. The woman in the glass was older. Yes. Lines along the jaw. Eyes a little dimmer. But there was something else now. A tilt of the chin. A quiet knowing. Not defiance. Not yet. But direction. And I thought, you're coming back to yourself. One margin note at a time. The hardest part was choosing the cover. I didn't want anything dramatic. No floral borders. No cursive fonts announcing a journey of resilience. Just something honest. I remembered a photo Rachel had taken years ago. Back when she still saw me. It was fall. The light was gold through the apartment windows. I was standing next to the bookshelf. One hand resting on the edge of the sill. The other holding Middlemarch. I wasn't posing. I didn't even know she had taken it. But when she printed it later, and left it on my desk, I saw something in that frame. Not beauty. Not youth. But a kind of stillness. Like I belonged to the room. Like the books behind me belonged to me. Not the other way around. I found the photo again. Tucked between old postcards. The corners curled. But the moment intact. I scanned it on the center's copier. Printed 2 versions. One in color. One in black and white. I stared at both. Holding them side by side in the afternoon light. Color had warmth. But the black and white held weight. No distraction. No decoration. Just lines. Shadows. Truth. That's the one I chose. I wrote the caption myself. Not on the image. But on the inside page. Photograph taken by Rachel S. Feldman. New York, 2009. Used with love. But not permission. It made me smile. For the first time in days. There was something deliciously quiet. About taking back your story. Without knocking on the door first. I typed the dedication last. Not to Rachel. Not to my late husband. But to the version of me that had gone quiet. To the woman I once was. And to the one I nearly forgot to become. The pages rustled as I flipped through them again. Each one marked by pencil. Gentle edits. Nothing crossed out in anger. Even the sections about Rachel. I left them as they were. Not to shame. But to preserve. Because truth, when told without bitterness, can still cut. But it heals, too. The envelope was thick. Brown craft paper. The kind that used to carry contracts. Manuscripts. Things that mattered. I sealed it with my left hand, pressed firm against the flap. Then ran a line of clear tape across the top. Twice. Not because it needed it. But because I needed it to feel sure. The return address read, Anita L. Feldman. Room 213, West Wing. Greystone Care Facility. For a moment, I stared at the word, care, wondering if it still meant what it used to. Then I slipped the envelope into my tote bag. The soft navy one with the fraying strap. And walked down to the mailbox by the front gate. They let me sign out alone. Said the weather was nice. The air smelled like early spring. Wet pavement. Faint pollen. Something trying to be new again. I reached the mailbox. Waited for the street to empty. Then opened the slot. The metal was cold. Rough on the edges. Like it hadn't been used much lately. I slid the envelope in. Felt its weight. Leave my fingers. Felt my name. Leave the room quietly. But firmly. There was no applause. No music. Just the click of the door. And the wind tugging gently at my sleeve. I stood there for a minute. Longer than I needed to. Just breathing. I thought of all the things I had signed. Without understanding. Without being asked. This time, No one had handed me the pen. No one had told me what it was for. This time, I had chosen the paper. The title. The truth. On the way back, I passed the common room. The usual afternoon game show echoing from the TV. But I didn't go in. Instead, I returned to the library, sat in the same chair, and opened my notebook again. Not to write, but to wait. Because something had shifted. Not loudly, but deeply. The kind of shift that makes no sound until someone tries to move you back. And I wondered, when silence is your greatest weapon, will they ever see it coming? The package arrived 2 weeks later, wrapped in plain brown paper. No fanfare. No ribbon. Just my name. Typed. Spelled correctly. I opened it slowly. Not out of caution, but reverence. The first thing I noticed was the weight. Heavier than I expected. Heavier than memory. Inside, 12 copies of my book. 12. I had asked for 10, but David had printed a few extra. Just in case someone wants to keep reading, he'd written in a note. I held the top copy in both hands. The paper was matte. No gloss. No shine. It felt like truth. The cover was exactly how I imagined. Black and white. No title on the front. Just the image. Me. Beside the bookshelf. Holding Middlemarch. Looking into nothing. And everything. I ran my fingers across the spine. My name printed neatly at the bottom. Anita Feldman. No longer just in mailboxes. Or medical files. But on something that might outlive me. I sat down on the edge of my bed. Let the book rest in my lap. And opened to the first page. My own words looked different. Printed. Bound. They no longer felt like thoughts. But declarations. This is what I saw. This is what I remember. This is what I refuse to let vanish. I read the first paragraph aloud. My voice steadier than it had been in months. It didn't echo. But it filled the room. And I realized. That was enough. That night, I placed one copy in the library's return cart. Quietly. No note. No inscription. Let someone find it by accident. Let them decide if it was fiction or not. Because that was the gift. Not being believed. But being read. Even once. Even by a stranger. By morning, the book was gone. Someone had taken it from the cart. Not stolen. Just chosen. Later that afternoon, I saw it resting on the windowsill. By the jigsaw table. Next to a half-completed picture of Monet's garden. No one said anything. But the page had been dog-eared. A day after that, a staff member stopped me in the hallway. Held up the book gently. Did you write this? I paused. Then nodded. Yes. She didn't ask more. Didn't press. Just smiled. Softly. Then said, my mother. She would have loved this. Her voice cracked on the word. Mother. And then she walked away. In the dining room, I began noticing glances. Not curious. Not invasive. But different. Like I was being seen. Not for what I had lost. But for what I had kept. On Thursday, someone left a folded note under my water glass. It said, Page 47 made me cry, thank you. No name. No handwriting I recognized. But the curve of the Y looked young. And I wondered if maybe Clara's granddaughter had visited again. I didn't ask. Didn't need to. The book had done what it needed to. It had spoken. Where I had long gone silent. One morning, I found Edith in the lounge. The book in her lap. Open to the dedication. She looked up slowly. I don't read much anymore, she said. But this feels like someone finally sat down beside me and listened. I felt tears press behind my eyes. But didn't let them fall. Instead, I sat next to her. In silence. letting the moment be enough. Later, I passed the front desk, heard one of the aides reading aloud, softly, to another resident. I couldn't hear the words, but I recognized the rhythm. It was mine. It echoed down the hall like breath, returning, like something long withheld, being given back, line by line. Rachel came the following Sunday. Without calling, she brought her son, now crawling, a soft blue sweater, big eyes that hadn't learned how to forget anyone yet. I met them in the garden. Spring had started to push against the edges of things. Tulips barely open. Birdbath full of yesterday's rain. Rachel sat on the bench beside me. Said nothing at first. Only watched her child crawl toward the shade. Then she pulled the book from her bag. Held it in her lap. Her thumb tracing the spine. "You wrote it," she said. Her voice wasn't cold. Just small. I nodded. "You used my photo." "Yes." She didn't argue. Didn't ask for credit. Or for an apology. Instead, she opened to the first page. Ran her eyes over the dedication. Then closed it again. "It's beautiful," she said. Almost whispered. I waited. But no more words came. There was nothing else to explain. No debts to clear. No confrontation to win. This was never about vengeance. Only visibility. She looked at me then. Really looked. For the first time in years. And I think, in that quiet, she saw the part of me that had not disappeared. Had only been waiting. Her son crawled toward me. Reached for my hand. And without thinking, I let him press his fingers into my palm. Tiny. Warm. Undecided. Rachel stood after a while. "I'll let you rest," she said. But paused before turning. "He'll read it one day," she added. More to herself than to me. And then walked away. I sat there long after they left. The breeze soft. The light golden and slow. The book still in my lap. Still warm from her hands. I didn't smile. Didn't cry. Just watched the page edges lift slightly in the wind. Like they had their own breath now. And I thought, this is justice. Not because I made them listen. But because I stopped waiting to be asked. Is this justice? Or is it too harsh? What would you have done? The library shelf now had its own label. Resident authors. It was printed on cardstock. Laminated. Taped carefully, just above 3 books. Mine included. I didn't ask for the label. Didn't even know someone had made it. But the first time I saw it, my hands trembled slightly. And I smiled. Not a wide smile. Just the kind that lives quietly. At the corner of your mouth. When something long gone finds its way back. Each afternoon, I returned to that corner of the building. Past the rec room. Past the nurse station. Through the narrow hallway that still smelled of lemon cleaner and old dust. And there, by the window with the broken blind, I wrote. Not for a deadline. Not for an audience. But because I had more to say. Some days, it was a paragraph. Other days, just one sentence. But each word was mine. The aides began asking if I wanted tea when they made their rounds. And I said yes. Chamomile. 2 sugars. They didn't rush me anymore. Didn't call me home quite as often. One even asked, "Do you need more notebooks?" And I almost cried. Not because I did, but because someone thought I might. One morning, I passed the printer near the administration office. It was humming softly. And I stopped to listen. That sound. The low, steady rhythm of paper being pulled from silence into something permanent. It made my chest ache. The last time I'd heard that sound. I was editing a debut novel. 30 years ago. In a tiny office above a bakery. The windows steamed with cinnamon. And promise. Now. I wasn't editing. I wasn't curating someone else's voice. I was writing mine. Later that day, a new resident named Helen asked to borrow my copy. She had heard someone mention it during lunch. I handed it to her without hesitation. No signature. No inscription. She held it like it might break. Then said, "My daughter thinks I don't remember anything anymore. But I do. I just don't say it out loud." I nodded and pressed the book into her hands. "Maybe it's time we start saying it out loud," I whispered. She didn't reply. But that night, she sat beside me in the lounge and began writing in a spiral notebook with a pencil someone had sharpened down to a nub. 2 women. 2 stories. 2 voices. Still breathing. Still writing. Spring turned soft that year. The kind that didn't announce itself. Just arrived quietly. One bud at a time. I moved back into my old room. The one with the narrow window and the west-facing light. They had cleaned it. Changed the curtains. But I asked for the old ones back. They were a little worn. But the fabric remembered how the afternoon light moved. And so did I. I placed a small stack of my books on the windowsill. Not to show off. Just so I could see them when I drank my tea. They looked like anything else on any shelf. But I knew what they were. Proof that not everything fades quietly into the drawer of someone else's decisions. One afternoon, I received a letter. Not from Rachel. Not from a stranger. But from a small bookstore in Brooklyn. Someone had found a copy, left behind on a bench, and donated it to their local Voices shelf. The owner read it, then reached out. She didn't ask for a biography. Didn't ask for reviews. Just wanted to know if I'd written anything else. I wrote back. In longhand. 3 pages. Told her I wasn't sure if I had another book. But I was still writing. Still paying attention. She replied a week later. Said that was enough. We exchanged postcards for months. Little notes about birds in the garden. About the sound of trains at night. About the smell of old bookstores and rain on pavement. It wasn't friendship. Not exactly. More like recognition. At a distance. Some evenings, I sat by the window, watched the hallway lights spill across the floor. Sometimes I wrote. Other times I just thought. Not about what I had lost, but about how much I had finally chosen. To speak. To begin. To continue. I didn't need the world to remember me. I only needed to remember myself. The books remained. On the shelf. In someone's bag. In a drawer beside a paperclip and a mint. And that was enough. Because I had lived. Fully. And finally. In my own words. The sun dipped behind the city skyline. Soft gold turning blue. And I whispered. Let this be enough. The page doesn't have to be perfect. Only honest. Has your voice ever been forgotten by others, or by yourself? We invite you to share your story below. You never know who's waiting for your words. You are not alone. Subscribe to Kamar FM, where every story is a second chance.